Hey guys, welcome back to Frictionless Commerce. I'm your host, Matt Johnson. And on today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to a couple of incredible industry colleagues. I have Scott Wagner from the NAED Digital Center of Excellence, spent a lot of his career working in electrical distribution and is now really leading a push among distributors to adopt digital tools, digital commerce experiences. I'm excited to pick his brain on this episode. And then I've also invited my colleague, Chantal Schweizer, and she runs the strategic data services division here at Pivotree. She really is on the front lines of developing the foundation for digital adoption and digital transformation. So we're going to jump right in and I'm going to introduce Scott. Scott, welcome to Frictionless Commerce. It is a pleasure to have you here, industry veteran and electrical distribution expert. Scott, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you're at today. I'd just love to know more about your backstory.
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's great to be with you both today. I've been in the industry, the electrical industry now. This is my 36th year. And I like to tell people just a couple more and I'll finish my apprenticeship. I did start out in the trade as an electrician. I still love to tinker with my tools. And I kind of look at that experience as the foundation for everything else I've been able to do in my career. I have worked in manufacturing for Schneider Electric in various different roles there. And for 3 different distributors, Mayer Electric, Rexel, and Border States. And in my time with distributors, I've done just about everything you can think of under the sun, from counter sales, inside project management, purchasing, marketing, training, analytics, and probably a few things I'm not thinking of right now. But so I'm kind of the person on the team at NAD that I know the day in the life. I've done most of the work. I understand the challenges and the opportunities. And my entire career, I've always been someone who kind of straddles somewhere between IT and the business. I'm not an IT guy, but I speak the same language. I'm a nerd. I admit it. I love tech. I'm always somebody who's looking for a way to leverage technology to innovate, to do things more efficiently. And that's really what attracted me to come to NAD and start in this role about 1.5 years ago, is the idea that we could maybe solve some really big problems that have lasted for an incredibly long period of time. I think our industry is slow to adopt tech. Traditionally, there is a little more urgency today, but that's really what we're trying to encourage, is for folks to consider the opportunities. And if they have questions about how to get started, that's what we're here to help with.
Love that. Love that. Chantel, can you give us your background, your history? Very similar to Scott's, I know, in some ways. So introduce yourself to the audience and tell us what gets you out of bed every morning, excited to work in this industry.
All right, let's see. So Chantal Schweizer, as Matt had mentioned, I'm the practice director of strategic data services. And yeah, I got my start at Grainger. I was there for about 8 years on their product data team, working with all the various manufacturers, gathering all the data, normalizing it, getting it into the taxonomy structures, updating the taxonomy and the schema over there. Did a bunch of work with supplier onboarding, finding ways to make our processes more lean. So a really great time at Grainger. I really got my foundation there. And then I went over to Schneider Electric. So Scott and I have both worked for Schneider at one point in time. And there I was running one of their PIM systems and gathering the data to send to the Graingers of the world. I enjoyed both the distribution side of the business and the manufacturing side of the business when it comes to product data experiences, and got to experience a couple different PIMs in that process as well. I then went to the consulting side, and I've been doing taxonomy data, product data consulting the past 10, 15 years, running teams that are helping people create taxonomies, enrich their data, fill in their gaps. And it's been a great ride. We've worked with a lot of great companies over the course of the last 15 years that I've been doing consulting, and a lot of them in the electrical space. And yeah, it's been wonderful. A lot of great learnings, and I've gotten to meet a lot of great people and work with all sorts of folks. And the more I get to learn about it, the more exciting it is.
It's amazing. And I think, that's one of the things that I'm excited about is, as you start working with more and more distributors and particularly in the electrical industry, you start to realize that this is a really fun nut to crack. There's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of problems that, as a problem solver, it's a fun industry to work in. Speaking of which, Scott, you've been working on some of these challenges in the electrical distribution industry for many years. Things have changed, I'm guessing, quite a bit over the last 10, 15 years. What are you seeing today as we kind of stand on, an edge of like really significant disruption with as we look forward to AI, as we think about changing buyer demographics. Can you speak to what are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges in specifically the electrical distribution industry today?
Yeah, there's two major driving forces that are kind of shaping what's happening and why people are doing certain things. One of those is the topic of electrification, that really more and more things are being powered by electricity than ever before. And the demand for electricity, think about all the AI stuff, all those data centers, they need electricity to power them. And we've got to meet that demand with equipment and people and resources to make it all happen. So that's, again, unprecedented amount of demand that we've got to solve for. And at the same time, we have a huge workforce challenge. And we're in the middle of a generational shift where the boomers are retiring 10,000 a day, and we don't have a replacement generation to, fill every seat. So how are we going to do all of this work with fewer people and get them up to speed faster? I believe we'll do that with technology. So those are the two big rocks that are out there. And I think people in our space adopting technology at a rate that is, again, not common for us. Our industry's been very slow to adopt and been able to kind of get away with it for a long time. And now we're trying to compress that into a short period. And not only the distributors, but the manufacturers, the customers, the contractors. I'm hearing stories of contractors getting on SAP, which you wouldn't have ever imagined years ago. A lot of them would run a very low tech business. Well, they're needing to find efficiency as well and value and run their businesses in a better way. So all that's driving change.
For sure. And I want to touch on that idea of the talent problem, right? And finding the people that are going to run the business. And I'm assuming you mean both. I'm assuming both on the customer end, the end customer, the contractors, the companies that are out there building this electrical infrastructure. There's a talent gap there, but there's also a talent gap with the distributors themselves. Am I right?
Yeah, it's really on all fronts. We see it as an industry problem. So we're actually working with, NAED is the Association for Distributors. We also have NEMA for manufacturers, ECA for contractors, and NEMRA for manufacturers we have a coalition to work together to solve these kinds of issues. And the workforce challenge is definitely central to that. The other thing to think about is, for a distributor, and I know this role probably best, an entry-level job almost, it's not quite entry-level, but counter sales. And that's one of the spots I've filled over the years. Anecdotally, we hear it takes 2 years to train someone to be really effective in a counter sales role. And those counter sales people, they'll later be your inside sales and maybe your outside sales staff and branch managers. So it's part of that path. And in the electrical industry, and I know we're not unique in this, because it takes a long time to develop talent because of the product knowledge you need, we end up cannibalizing talent from each other. So most people you meet that work for a distributor have worked for more than two, myself included. So I think if we figure out a way to address that help people get up to speed faster, and it is more in our systems or technology, that'll also be addressed in the process.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a selfish question here. So I have 4 boys, ages 11 to 15, and we've been trying to think about what is the direction we should kind of nudge them toward when it comes to what should they be doing after high school. Should they be getting a college degree? Should they go to trade school? So I don't know, do you have any advice there by chance?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a couple things. If you look at those two big choices, right? The folks that are in college, and I actually spoke to a group of incoming freshmen a few weeks back at UAB. They're kids that just graduated from high school. And their question is, what should I be learning? Because it's such an unknown right now. What's the world going to look like in 4 or 5 years?
Exactly.
What should they learn how to do? And then what will AI replace? There's a lot of fear around that. And then you look at the other side, the trades in particular, there seems to be more certainty there on like what you'll need to know how to do. And then the economics of the two things, if you go to college, you got to pay for that. And you have a delay before you can start earning. And depending on what your situation is, you might accumulate debt and then you have to pay that back. And if you wanted the trades, you're earning right away. And they're actually, because there is such a demand for people, it's a great place to go make money right now. It really is. And like I said to start, I see that experience for me is really the foundation that everything else was built on. And if I've had any success in my career, it's largely because when I was considered for a role, maybe among other candidates, I had that. He worked in the field. He knows what it's like to install this stuff. So I think that helped me along the way. And I really think we're going to see a big shift back to skilled trades in a big. And there's a lot going on. If you listen to Mike Rowe, he talks about it every day. So
Very nice. So we've been nudging them in the right direction. I'm happy to hear that.
I could not agree more. My 20-year-old is actively looking into the electrical trades right now. So I'm living that reality myself. And I think, to your point, Scott, what AI is doing in these white collar jobs, and we're seeing massive cuts across various industries out there with, these sort of typical office type jobs, analyst jobs, developer jobs, customer service. Like, these are the things that AI is really going to make a huge impact on. And those trade roles are going to be more valuable than ever before. And it used to be, how do I make six figures? Go to school, right? And go that traditional route. Six figures in the trades is not going to be a problem. And, I'm excited for the future there. It also, it's kind of a better life when you think about it. I don't know, like, it's just getting out there, working with your hands, like, get outside, and I don't know. I think it's going to be good in a lot of ways for our culture.
I agree. I think, I say it often, things were so much simpler when I was just bending pipe and pulling wire. And there's a lot of satisfaction you get out of building something and the instant gratification that comes from flipping the switch and turning on something or fixing something. You talked about problems to solve. That's kind of foundational for me. And where I get my joy and excitement out of work is solving problems. And it was never more obvious and enriching than in that day-to-day work. You do get to work outside. That is good some days. It can be a little challenging. Others, it can be really cold or it can be really hot. But I do miss it, to be honest with you.
I can imagine. I see the guys here in the Florida heat sometimes doing that. I do not envy them. But I also know how pasty I am sitting here in my office all day. Hey, speaking of the workforce and specifically turning the conversation to distributors, I'm assuming there are two kind of big paths or two initiatives that probably need to happen in distribution in particular. One is, investing in the industry at a regional technical school level, creating that awareness. Just as one example, I worked with an industrial distributor years ago who sponsored, a community technical college, and they sponsored a program where they were bringing awareness to the trades, but also at the same time explaining like, hey, come and work for a distributor who sells to these tradesmen. And, this is a good career path as well. So it's like, there's probably an education, like awareness thing that has to happen for the younger generation to understand, okay, distribution is actually an industry that maybe I should consider as I work through my school. So that's one point. And then the other point is, what happens when this younger generation gets into our distribution business? Are we going to have the tools, the technology that is going to utilize their skill sets to the fullest, right? So I often think of, and I said this before, but I think of like a young Gen Z person who's lived their whole life on a phone, and or maybe they're using an OS system, and then they get into an ERP green screen at a counter job, and they're like, "What the heck is this?" They're like, that's just not exciting. This is not what they imagine that they would be doing with their life. Like, they're great at problem solving, they're great at using technology, but that's not exactly the strength of distribution operations. So what are your thoughts on that? And Chantal, please jump in on all of these.
Yeah, it's, that is a challenge. And this industry is one, and anybody who works in distribution, you have this feeling that no one really knows we exist. They walk by us every day and they just don't realize there's all this work going in the background, which is the supply chain to bring everything to bear that is needed to, when you go to flip a switch in your house, turn on the lights, that something happened in the background to get to that point. It isn't, from a technological standpoint, sexy. It's one of those things that we have to realize about our industry. And that is another compelling reason to kind of upgrade what we do technologically, is to not necessarily excite our people, but enable them. Those preferences you mentioned around Gen Z, they come to work with those norms, and always being able to just pull up a phone and go on an app and do what they need to do. And we have to think about, well, how does that translate to our environment, those expectations met, and then also harnessing that energy for innovation that they have to tell us what we need to go do. I tell a story. I used to do this all the time when I was in operations and I had new members of the team. We talked to them about, it's called the freight train. And it's the first day for a worker in a plant, and the plant manager is giving them a tour, walking through each department, explaining what they do, giving them a high level overview. And during the tour, a freight train just goes ripping by the building and shakes the whole place. And they continue the tour, they get to the end, and the plant manager says, well, do you have any questions? And the new employee says, yeah, does that freight train go by like that every day? And the manager said, what freight train? And the message in that is, we become immune to those things that they're just what we deal with every day. And it takes a fresh set of eyes to help us understand what's going on. What are these problems? Why did we do this way? Or, hey, could we do this instead? And it's important to engage them early before they assimilate and they don't hear the freight train anymore.
Very, very true. And that made me think of something that we had when I was at Grainger. We had something called a passport program where you could go, there was a whole bunch of various jobs across Grainger in the, like out in the field, in the corporate office, out in sourcing, where you could live a day in the life with someone in these different roles and get to understand what that role was like. What do they do day to day? What are their goals? How does their job apply to what we're doing as a company whole? And that was a really cool thing. And I got to check out a bunch of different roles and just see how it was. I got to go out in the field and be behind the counter and understand, like, what are all the processes behind the counter in the warehouse. And it really helped me understand, like, how what I do affects different roles in the company, how having like good product data makes it easier for the guy on the counter to be able to find the data he needs to answer a customer question, and how to make sure like the warehouse guys have the right dimensions for the products to make sure things can be put away properly. So it was a really cool program, and I definitely would encourage all distributors to do something like that. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot from it.
I love that. To me, that's foundational. You mentioned the word lean earlier. That's really about what lean is as a supplier input, process, output, customer. And knowing who your supplier and your customer is and what their challenges are is really important. That's how all process improvement really can take place between departments. And I think, there's a lot of lessons in that, you know, I actually advocate for, in operations, to think about, you'll reach a certain scale transactionally where you have to shift your thinking from warehousing really as a core discipline to manufacturing, or at least the mindset and what you just talked about. So see, where can we all work together? How can we build better outcomes for the customer? How can we build better service internally? And that's really where it starts, those conversations, that perspective you gained.
Very
Yeah.
nice. One other thing you said in there made me think about how, like, they don't know all the work that's happening behind the curtain. I get that all the time personally with my job. A lot of customers are surprised how much work it takes to build out these taxonomy and schemas, fill in all the gaps in their data, normalize the data. It's a load of work. And I find people are always surprised by how many hours we estimate could go into some of these jobs. And then once they're actually in it, they're like, oh, wow, we probably could have used a lot more hours even than this to really do a full job of this product data. So it's always kind of a continuous learning about how much work is actually happening behind the curtain, for sure.
Yeah.
And to that point too, my next question was, because I can't miss this opportunity with Scott to talk about customer experience. And because really, when you think about what sets distributors apart today and into the future, I don't believe that it's going to be about supply chain. Supply chain's important, but there's so many sources for finding what I need, right? There's so much competition. It's really about who understands their customers best and meets them where they're at with the tools that they need to accomplish a seamless, frictionless purchasing experience and relationship. So I'd love to know more about what you're seeing, what people are talking about in terms of meeting this changing buyer demographic. This next generation of contractors and OEM purchasing agents or managers. I'm jumping ahead to my AI question, but what are some of the distributors thinking about? Like, how are we meeting these new types of buyers where they're at? What is the technology that we're seeing out there, and how are we looking to change? Maybe not wholesale change, but make incremental changes to better serve those customers.
Yeah, honestly, I think this is one of those areas that um, I wouldn't say it's complete ignorance, but it's something that most don't quite understand yet what the difference is going to be. There's an assumption that, well, we've been doing this a long time and customers will come and buy from us the way they always have, and it'll migrate very slowly if it does. But I think B2B and B2C is closer together today than it ever has been. And from the expectation standpoint, the way we all buy things in our personal lives, those expectations extend to the way you want to purchase anything in life. So I think, the websites that distributors put in place, 10, 15 years ago, it was very much about replacing the shelf full of catalogs behind everybody. That now it's an electronic catalog. And there is some buying and selling going on over those sites. There is some e-commerce, but I think it's largely seen as it's something we have to do. We check a box, we've got a site. And unless your customers are saying, hey, we have to buy this way, it's not a driving force. That's shifting right now. And I honestly think, the topic you talk about a lot, Matt, is that the idea of the, e-commerce and frictionless commerce and the agents and all that and how that's going to change things. And I think that will be absolutely undeniable. You can do things on your phone right now that I wouldn't have imagined you could do 3 years ago. And then also just some of the behaviors, I mentioned talking to that class of incoming freshman students at a university. And I was asking them about, how do you like to buy? When you're going to buy something, how do you like to do it? And one of them gave an example of they were at a store, physically at a store, and they saw something they wanted to get. And then they decided to pull it up on their phone and buy it on their phone and then leave and have it delivered to their house from somewhere else. And I said, why would you do that? You were right there. It was in front of you. You could have bought it. Well, I got to go get the credit card and all these things. It's just so much easier to just buy it on my phone, right? Well, that'll happen when that person goes to work. They're going to have the same needs or wants to engage that way. And that is, again, part of what I'm beating the drum about with our distributors is that, hey, you need to think about that customer expectation and how you'll meet it. I think the other thing that distributors are really doing today is to get out of the conventional box of you call, we haul to bring stuff to people. And they're getting into services, simple things like, it's not really simple, but you would imagine this would be something we do, things around wire cutting and paralleling and saving the contractor money in the field, or doing prefab and storing material for projects, things like that. It's more physical and tangible. There's been a lot of focus in that. I think there's still room to grow that part of our business, and that builds deeper relationships. You get more hooks in the relationship with the customer, the more services they depend on. But I think that is the next real greenfield opportunity area of think about the digital side of what you do instead of just the physical.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about when you were saying that was just how impatient we are as a culture today because of what technology has done. We're like, where's my Amazon box? Where's my Uber? Where's my, where's my DoorDash order? And by the way, like all of these apps that we have in our personal life have trained us to not only get instant gratification and instant availability, but we also are getting updates all along the way. And what's missing in a traditional distribution to contractor, industry is that speed and those up-to-date notifications, right? This is something that if I think about, if I'm a young, purchasing manager, or I'm a young contractor in the field and, I see something that I need to replace, or I'm short on these products, these parts. What do I want to do? What's my first reaction? Is my first reaction to call up a branch and ask if they have it in stock? Or would I rather snap a picture of what I need and text it and then get a notification back with an agent going, yeah, this is what I've matched that image to. Is this what you're looking for? Yes, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, looks like we have 5 of these in stock at, so-and-so warehouse. We can have it ready, later this afternoon. Click yes to confirm. Like, that's the kind of experience that is going to completely set apart distributors with this next generation. And it's actually not that far. It's not so far-fetched as we think it is. And I'd love to hear Chantel's thoughts about, like, what's it going to take to get to the point where we are able to facilitate that sort of agentic, search and find process, especially as it relates to what has to happen in the back end behind the scenes.
Yeah, a lot of it is going to come to having the right tools and then having the data set up in order to support those agentic queries and everything. You're going to need to have your product data clean, consistent, and especially complete. You're going to want to make sure your customer data is very clean and complete as well, along with their order history, and having smart tools that can suggest like next steps for the products. Like if you buy a refrigerator in 6 months, you're going to want to change that filter in the refrigerator. So knowing that personalization approach, like having something possibly ping the customer and say, hey, it's time for you to get a filter. Do you want me to put this order on for you? Yes, no. And yeah, having all the data in there to be able to support those kinds of things that you were mentioning, like, oh yeah, that is this widget. Do you want us to order for that for you now? It can be ready this afternoon. The widget knowing the location that the person who is making the query is at, and where are the locations that are closest to that area? Is that item in stock? Properly identifying that item, and then possibly even suggesting, oh, you're buying this widget. In order to install it, you also are going to need one of these. Do you want this too? So yeah, there's a bunch of data structures underneath this in tooling that is going to be necessary to support that type of experience. I think a lot of companies are still a long way from getting to that level of digital maturity. But I've definitely, like Scott was saying earlier, people are getting better at it. Everybody's digitally maturing a little bit more and more. And it sounds like people are starting to realize that they have to do that if they want to keep up with the situation today, or else they're going to start losing market share to those who do.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, it kind of goes back to that empowering the new workforce concept. What can these tools, right? Like, so, instead of cannibalizing some other distributor's workforce, I could bring on somebody junior with no experience, put an AI sidekick in their hands with access to my entire catalog, supply chain data, inventory data. And now all of a sudden, that junior person could be asking questions, going back and forth with this agent sidekick. And on the fly, whereas in the past, it's like somebody calls into them, they have a custom quote come in, they don't know how to handle it. So they have to go find Susan in this department. She knows everything. I don't know anything. And just a back and forth that has to happen. Instead, they've got a Susan in a chat, and they can go talk and get answers and respond back to that customer with confidence. How could that potentially change the game for the way that we think about building our internal sales teams?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, those dynamics, and it kind of fits into what I said earlier about someone coming in younger, new, to the industry with fresh ideas. But I think it's also interesting to see, I've seen this happen. And I love to witness someone's AI aha moment. And I was in a branch not long ago and was talking to a sales guy that I've known for 20 plus years. Very experienced, successful salesperson, has done things the same way for a long time. And I just asked him, I said, are you using AI in your job? And he goes, well, I'm not at work, but I'm doing meal plans and workout plans and whatever, researching things, but only for personal use. I said, well, you haven't thought about using it at work? And he said, well, what would I do with it? And every salesperson's office I've ever been in this industry, there's product everywhere, So I said, pick up a product and take a picture and ask it, what is this? And he did that and it told him. And I said, now ask, what's the part number? And he did, and it told him. And he went around me, went to the next office, to the next salesperson and said, are you using AI? And by the time he showed the example to that person, his ChatGPT had run out of free tries and it said, you must upgrade. He goes, upgrade $20, no problem. He just moved right into it. So I saw him adopt AI like that. And I think it's things like that that drive what are the use cases? Where could we apply this technology that the traditional mode is, well, hey, E-team, keep us on the cutting edge. And they're out there reading and learning how to program in different languages and, how to do different things. They enable the business. But I think AI more than anything before, or the speed that things are moving at, the business users, the people that do the work have to be the ones to say, hey, I know what we could do with this. So I think if we're going to ever adopt these things, that's a great way to get there, because it also helps if your excuse me, your peer has found a use and they're going to advocate for it like that. What I witnessed, ran to the next office. It's like, okay, well, I could go beat that drum and they know me and they trust me, but to see someone that does what you do, finding value in something is pretty empowering. And even, you watch someone on the counter, that job is so transactional, and you got things coming in on a piece of cardboard written from the job site and all the trade terminology you got to deal with. And if someone can show them, hey, you can just take a picture of that, or you can run it through this AI and it'll just give you the part numbers, unburdened from that tedium, all that stuff we had to do to just get a list of products. And then they can focus on, hey, there's a system here, or the tools can help that long learning curve I mentioned. Shorten that curve. Now you got great tools that will help you. It's like I always use people worry about AI replacing them, but I think of it as more like the Iron Man suit, Jarvis. It's going to enable you to do more and really bring value to what you do. So having a person involved is pretty important in all of that.
Yeah, I saw the founder of NVIDIA on a recent news reel. He was asked about, is AI going to take people's jobs? And he said, basically, it won't necessarily take people's jobs, but you will lose your job to people that use AI. And I was like, that's so true. Like the people that are using AI are going to outperform people who don't, like 100x. It's not
Yeah.
even going to be close.
Stole that from me, by the way. I've been saying that for a few months now. I have it on a slide right now. I'm working on for a presentation next week.
Well, if the guy who makes the chips says it must be true. I don't know.
Exactly.
You know, so we have Chantal on here too. I wanted to touch on the sort of the state of industry data in electrical, right? So I think everybody would agree that if the future is, supplemented or even fully autonomous at some point, the data foundation has to be in place to power these tools and to empower this next generation of workforce. So that means that distributors in particular don't have to just get the data, that's part of it, get the right data from their supply partners, but also how are they utilizing it? So can you speak to what you're seeing in the industry? How available, how easy is it to get clean, complete, concise data? And how are they utilizing it, right? So it's one thing to get it, but it's another thing to put it into action, to activate that data either on an e-commerce channel or using it with an AI tool. Where do you see the majority of the industry right now?
A lot of folks are still gathering the data manually, where they're sending out like spreadsheets even out to their suppliers to have the suppliers fill it in and send it back in. I'm still seeing a lot of that, which is surprising. I'm also seeing, though, there's a lot of suppliers that'll have things like supplier portals, or distributors that'll have supplier portals so people can enter the data right in there. If you're a manufacturer and you have, say, 20 different distributors, they're going to want the data in 20 different ways. Some of them are going to want it in the spreadsheet. Some of them are going to want it in that supplier portal. Some of them will have a direct API for your internal system, which is usually the best case. And that can be a whole load of work. So when I think about this manufacturer distributor problem, the distributor is going to have problems getting the data from the manufacturers because not all the manufacturers are set up to have that data ready to go. When I was at Grainger, we had some manufacturers able to send us the data right away, and some of them would take 6 months to get the data because it was in so many different disparate systems in so many different places. So it was a really heavy lift. And what my team does when it comes to getting data for distributors is we just go out and scrape sites. We'll go out and scrape the PDP sites. We'll scrape any spec pages, any catalogs, all those fun things. And we have tooling that helps us both scrape it and then map it into the distributor's taxonomy and schema, and then normalize all that data so it's pretty. And if we do see holes, then we'll work with the distributor to get in contact with the manufacturer and see if we can help them fill those gaps in. Because one thing I do see a lot across all of the distributors is a ton of gaps. There seems to be a prevalence to have these attribute tables when you get down to the category level on the distributor sites. And you can just scrolling through them. My goodness, like the alarming number of gaps that are in those tables is definitely concerning.
Swiss cheese.
Ah, yes, yes, exactly. It's totally Swiss cheese. And the manufacturers that are going to win are going to be the ones that have that complete data because then they're going to have that market share. If manufacturer A only fills in 50% of the products and manufacturer B fills in 100% of the data for the products, then when you go to the distributor site and you either use filters or search, the ones that have the more complete data are going to be the more visible products and they're going to get the market share. If you search for a red 6-foot coaxial cable, but you don't have 6 foot filled in, then the guy that does have 6 foot filled in is going to get the sale. So yeah, data, super important for success in the future.
And it's, whenever I'm talking to distributors about these kind of tech topics, I always try to leave them with, if you're really uncertain about what you're going to do next, the very first thing you should do is start working on your data because it enables everything else you're going to do. And that world you described is real. I mean, every distributor faces the challenge of both incomplete data and how to fill it in. And then really kind of in the back of their mind, not really trusting if something loaded perfectly, they're going to go, wait. So they're going to have to go back because they have all the scars to prove it, right? That it is still today a very manually intensive. You have to have some really good people that just love that kind of work to dig in. And what happens too, you have organizations get invested that have 2 or 3 people that are just those people and they'll be there for 40 years. And then what are you going to do? And we always keep thinking the technology will catch up, but it still is remarkably a problem. And I think everyone is looking for what's the secret recipe to solve for it?
Yeah, and I think we've come a long way in the industry. We have like these syndication providers like IDEA who have done a good job of building out standardization and connecting suppliers and distributors. And it goes such a long way to getting you there. But it's only the first step, right? Because at the end of the day, distributors have to take data ownership, right? They have to own the data problem. It cannot be completely solved by waving a magic wand or, buying a subscription to data or, plugging in some new AI tool that goes in and finds data. At the end of the day, it really comes down to I have to own the data, own the governance standards that to put in place to continue to make this data machine work. And there are tools that help you do that. But I think distributors have been hesitant to really invest significantly in the data because there's this weird disconnect because it's like, well, I don't have a lot of people adopting my e-commerce site, therefore I'm not going to continue to invest in data. And yet I'm not investing in data. So therefore people are not adopting my e-commerce site. So it's like, it's a catch-22. It's like, well, what's the real problem here? So I think we have to get serious about owning the data problem. There are tools, there are syndication sources, there are providers like Pivotree that help do the heavy lift. There are consultants, there's software out there, but at the end of the day, Scott, I'll ask you this. We have to take ownership, right? Like, what does it look like from an executive standpoint to drive this message of digital transformation, innovation mindset? Like, what does it take? Is it a top-down approach? Is it a bottom-up? What are some of the best practices from the leaders that are in the industry doing this well?
Yeah, I think it's both when you ask about top down or bottom up. I think we have to address issues as they come up. Sometimes it's just the world we live in, but being more strategic and thinking about where we want to be in a year, 3, 5 is really critical. And that's where that leadership piece comes in. And I think, what we're seeing in the space right now is that investments being made in a lot of trial, going out and experimenting with different technologies to do things. And I think, the tool set around this problem, most distributors I know, they're using more than 3 or 4. They're trying to solve the problem by, working with all the possible angles you can get at it to make it easier. And again, everyone keeps thinking, well, I'll just keep going until the technology gets better and we'll get there. And that catch-22 you described is real, is that we confuse the lack of traffic with the lack of demand. The demand is there. We're just not ready for it. We're not prepared. It's just, I think there's a foundational issue too that it speaks to our data is the way we manage in our ERP systems and search. as a foundational concept. I challenge people, you see kiosks out there in the world today. You can go in and order yourself, right? You get a burger. I've asked people, would you put a kiosk out in front of your counter and ask your customers to navigate and find product the same way your people do? And I'm like, well, no, that'd be terrible. Well, why do you put your people through that? We need to upgrade these tools so the experience is better. And you could essentially do that. I don't know if we ever really would, but that's the same kind of experience you would have on a website. So if we're driven towards that taxonomy drill down to find the thing you need, and the problem is, I could pick 5 products off the shelf and they're going to be 5 different taxonomies, and it's really, some of them have 3 layers, some are going to have 12. It's just insane, all the feature and filtering you have to do to get to what you need. So these are all parts of a bigger problem, but I think how do we get there? Where do we start? It's understanding the data. It's understanding where we want to end up and start working towards that end goal. Or it's just not going to happen. We're going to be right here tomorrow. And I hate to think of this as the analogy, but there's a old place down the road, a buffet. And if you go there, the only people eating there are elderly. And they're going to dinner earlier and earlier in the day, right? And sooner or
Then
later,
why are
that
you
place.
there, Scott?
Well,
That doesn't
I
make any
drive by
sense.
it and I see them. I kind of laugh about it on my way somewhere cooler. But when I see that, I wonder, when will their customers be gone? Because they're not attracting any new customers. They're not. So the same thing is true of this, confusing the lack of traffic with demand. Sooner or later, who will you be selling to? So we have to change.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see this. I saw a post today and I was like, it really made me remember that sometimes we're very hard on the industry. We call people, we not people, but we call companies digital laggards. Such a derogatory term. We really harp on the fact that nobody's doing enough. They're not taking this seriously. And that may be true. Some companies inexplicably are resistant to change, no matter what it is. But we're seeing a ton of distributors, especially in like this mid market, where they're realizing that we do have to start somewhere, and we're seeing them invest in better e-commerce experiences, and we're seeing them invest in the people that are going to drive digital commerce. And so, I think it's also very encouraging the where we're heading, right? We're seeing these tools come into the market faster than ever before. And I want to end on this, Scott. And as we look forward, we do see a lot of good momentum. We're starting to see different technologies pop up. We're starting to see more and more thought leaders come into the industry and provide realistic step-by-step solutions. What would you encourage any executive at a distributor to do today? What is one thing that they need to start doing next week, right away, to begin building for this new customer experience and solving the issues that you talked about at the beginning, which was different customers coming in, different buyer demographics, and different employees coming into the business? What would you recommend that they work on first?
I think it really starts with engaging with your team beyond just the traditional, what you would think of as, I need to ask my IT team for help with technology. You need to engage with your people in those functional areas that work in the business, that know the pain points and the opportunities. And something you said about, companies are adopting. I'm actually seeing an interesting dynamic that smaller companies are actually much more agile in this way, because they're able to get their arms around the organization, where when you're a really big company, it's difficult to do that. If big companies have an advantage in that they can invest in a lot of different things simultaneously, and smaller companies need to pick their bets. But again, I think that agility is an advantage. And I met with a distributor recently that, they're doing some incredible things. And it all started with someone saying, hey, I have an idea. So being open to listening and engaging with your teams, inviting that, I think, is a good cultural move too today, because it gets people involved and locked into the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And in fact, the last episode, we did the 3-part series on building the roadmap for B2B agentic commerce. The 3rd episode, if you haven't listened to it yet, go check it out. The entire episode is about culture and leadership, because I spent 1/3 of the series talking about culture and leadership because nothing works. Doesn't matter how good the data is or what kind of API connected systems you have, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, nothing works if the leadership doesn't drive a culture of innovation, engaging those department heads, rolling it out, getting adoption and buy-in from everybody who's on the front line, running these processes, implementing these changes, and then creating that like back and forth, those communication lines where you get these new types of employees in the business. They haven't been, indoctrinated with the status quo. They come in, they've got some pretty freaking cool ideas, empower those people, have them come back, create that feedback loop. And now you've got a system, an engine for continually improving your operations and the customer experience. And I couldn't be more excited because the people that are thinking that way, there's more and more of them. And the technology is there to do it, and we can put it all together, and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm really excited about the future of electrical distribution. Scott, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to just ask you one thing. Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work, especially if you're a member of NAED listening to this? What would you like them to know, and how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously LinkedIn is a great place to go find me. We also have a website at naed.org. It's naed.org/DCOE. You can see kind of what me and my team are up to, and my contact information is there as well. I'd love to talk to everyone. I look at every conversation as an opportunity to learn. And Matt, I think back to the first conversation you and I had, and I knew we were brothers in geekdom, and I've really enjoyed talking to you, especially today. And I'd love to talk to anybody else who would love to engage in those ways.
Awesome. Scott, yep, we're just a bunch of happy nerds here. And I've enjoyed getting to know you and the Digital Center of Excellence. You really embody that. And I'm excited about the future there and happy to be a member and partner with NAED. Guys, this has been a great episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you are new to the show, please subscribe. We're on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube. You can get on any one of those platforms. You can listen. You can look at our beautiful faces. If you want to go to YouTube, please share the episode if you thought it was helpful with your colleagues and your team. It's been a pleasure. I will see you on the next episode. If you're ready to grow, let's go.